committed on the civilians by the Sri Lankan army by President Rajapaksa. This twisted logic nobody understood. How can the president be held responsible when the executor was the commander of the Sri Lankan army, Mr. Fonseca, and then the Tamils, particularly the pro-LTT Tamils. The TNA was always the spokesman for the LTT. I don't know whether they still are, but they proposed him as a candidate. That was the hour when the Tamils could have participated and joined with the Sinhalese majority and owned up this victory as a victory for peace, for democracy. But they missed it. And that is something that is an essential where all of us, including those in India and particularly those in India, must exercise their influence to see that the Tamils identify themselves with those steps taken by the government of Sri Lanka to bring normalcy to the state. I'm happy to see that today the Indian government has finally written a letter to Mr. Karunanidhi, the DMK chief, who is wanting to hold another conference for the creation of Elam. First, they verbally told him, if you mention Elam, that will be a criminal offense under our law. So he gave a public statement that he will not mention Elam as a separate country. But now they have sent a letter today that if you hold a conference and Elam name comes anywhere, then we'll ban the conference. So I think finally India is now again returning to the path of normalcy on the question of dealing with this question. But I would like the Tamil population to exhort the Tamil population through this platform that please identify yourself with this move towards normalcy, reconciliation, by owning up that whatever excesses, whatever has happened, has happened. Whatever allegations have been made are what happened 3 years ago. It is nobody's case that anything has happened since then. Our own government tells me before I leave for this conference that the work that the Sri Lankan government has done in rehabilitation is commendable. They have met most of the targets that they said that they would meet. So these are some of the things that needs to be highlighted, and the Tamil population should participate in that. The second essential, I think, is it's time that this idiom that this is an ethnic war be given up. There's nothing ethnic about it. You'll be surprised, many foreign delegates should be surprised to learn that both the Sinhalese and the Tamils claim that they came from India. Only that the Tamils have more vigorous spokesmen, whereas the Sinhalese have Lalu Yadav and other people there who are not interested in the problem. The Sinhalese claim they came from Orissa, Bengal, and Bihar. And the leaders of those states are not bothered about the fate of Sinhalese at all. It's only the Tamils who had been fed this separatist ideology, which has now been exploded by the new genetic research through the use of DNA. Modern research, scientific genetic research now says that all Indians have the same DNA. The British, when the British were ruling in India, they produced textbooks to made out that we were two communities, one called Aryans and the other called Dravidians. And the Dravidians were ruling India, then the Aryans came from Europe, and through the Hindu Kush, they invaded India and took over and drove the Dravidians to the south. And Mr. Karunanidhi in Tamil Nadu bought this wholesale. In fact, he used to till recently celebrate Ravan Leela, because in North India we celebrate Ram's victory over Ravan, who was the king of Sri Lanka. But he was not a Sri Lankan. He actually was born on the borders of Delhi in a place now called Noida. And his wife was born in Meerut, Mandodari. And later on, his brother was here. He came and conquered Sri Lanka and became the king. The demon king, as it's called, the great Ramayana, which Mr. Karunanidhi turned upside down and started celebrating Mr. Ravan as the great hero of the Dravidians. There is no word called Aryan in entire scripture. There is a word called Arya, which means gentleman. But there is no word called Aryan. There is no record in any part of Indian scriptures or historical writings that some people came from outside and ruled. But somehow, perhaps divide and rule was the policy of the British. It has been part of our textbooks, which is now slowly being exercised now because of modern science, that there is no such division at all. We are one. And I know there is a research which has not yet been published, going to be published soon, which shows that Sinhalese and Tamils also have the same DNA. There's no ethnic difference between the Sinhalese and the Tamils, and that is what the Tamils and the Sinhalese both should recognize. Nor is there any religious difference in any fundamental sense. The difference between Buddhism and Hinduism is much smaller than between Shia and Sunnis and the Catholics and the Protestants. We Hindus recognize Buddha as our God, as a evolved soul, divine soul who reformed some of the bad practices in Hinduism. And therefore, that doesn't divide us. In fact, I am very pleased to see Sri Lankan leaders coming to India and going to temples. The Tirupati, the Sai Baba temple, the Guruvayurpan temple. So there is no religious difference of any significance. Even linguistic differences. Both languages enjoy common vocabulary through Sanskrit. Tamil has 40% Sanskrit words. The Sinhalese language probably has more. I don't know any Sinhalese at all, but when I listen to Sinhalese speak, I can at least understand the gist of what they're saying because of the Sanskrit words. So where is the difference? The difference is not cultural, the difference is not religious, the difference is not racial. It's not an ethnic difference. And if that is taught through schools and colleges and textbooks, then this divide will go. The Tamils are different. And by the way, let me tell you that after eating this Tamil food here, I have come to the conclusion that the Tamils of Sri Lanka didn't come from Tamil Nadu, but came from Kerala. So you may have to amend that. And the words they use, the accent they use is also very Malayali. So anyway, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that we are all the same, and that has to be instilled in the younger generation, that we are one people. We have differences. In India, we have all kinds of differences. But when there is an attack on the nation, we have combined. Whenever there's a war, India has combined. Whenever there's a catastrophe like an assassination of a leader, we have become one. So we may have differences, may have disagreements, but ultimately when the country's future is at stake, we should be one. That's a second essential that has to be instilled into the population. There's no Aryan Dravidian, that's nonsensical. Dravida is a Sanskrit word, which means where the three, it's a sandhi of two, it's a fusion of two words, which essentially means where the three oceans meet. And that is southern India. And I told you the word Arya has no other meaning except that you are a gentleman or a person of culture. Now the other thing that we need to do is the third essential, and that is the question of minority and majority. And that can be rectified only by devolution. No doubt Tamils are minority. And if you divide Tamils into Tamils Muslims and Tamils Christians and Tamil Hindus, it becomes even bigger minority, even more sharply a minority. The Sinhalese population is 75%, like the Hindus are 83% in India. It's a dominant thing. And when you have a dominant majority, everything can't be decided by majority rule. It's a standard constitutional principle. There have to be safeguards. That is the only problem that today Sri Lanka has to address. As an observer, I say, as a well-wisher of Sri Lanka, I say. Yes, there was a disproportionate representation of the Tamils in 1948, but much water has flown down the rivers. And now is the time to recognize Tamils as a minority and to bring in constitutional changes which would then make it possible for the Tamils to meet some of their regional, local aspirations without disturbing the overall integrity of the island of Sri Lanka or the country of Sri Lanka. How is that to be done? That is the question. And I'll take 2 minutes just to conclude on that. We need, therefore, a constitutional change, not in the fundamental sense. Indian constitution is a unitary constitution. Sri Lankan constitution is a unitary constitution. There's no need for you to have, any one of us to have, because we are in the nation building process, a federal constitution like the United States, where the states are almost a law unto themselves. We need, therefore, safeguards to see that any time a state tries to break loose or doesn't perform according to national objectives, then there must be constitutional provisions by which it should be enforced. 13th plus amendment now is in great circulation. The 13th amendment itself was adopted by the parliament. Some changes are necessary. I had the opportunity yesterday of meeting your president, who said that if the parliamentary process can be speeded up by a cooperation from the Tamil community and the opposition, then it can be done quickly. And that's precisely what needs to be done. I would therefore, I have a print, I circulated to the organizers a copy of my written address, which is in much greater detail. But let me say, I point 8 points, and with that I will conclude. First is that no proposal for reconciliation should be and can be pushed from abroad. It has to be indigenously emerge. And of course, with due consultation with stakeholders, nobody has a veto, but Parliament is the ultimate authority. Second is that there was widespread acceptability of the concept of 13 plus amendment, and this should be suitably modified by parliamentary committees, and a final shape should be given to that as early as possible, because that's the only thing that is being used against Sri Lanka all over the world. There is a minority and the majority doesn't want to devolve power. Nobody goes into the substance of what kind of devolution. But I think, get it out of the way. Some devolution should be done. And therefore, this is out of the debate. And once it's out of the debate, then we can proceed further with other aspects of nation building. So there should not be much delay. This is my opinion. Whether there will be delay or not, that only Sri Lankans will decide. But I am of the view that it will be much easier to fight the enemies of Sri Lanka unity if there is some devolution in the near future. Third is that, of course, the Sri Lankan constitution must remain unitary, and the center should have power to dismiss the provinces when they don't act in accordance with the constitutional provisions. The provincial governments, in order to be acceptable to the minority, should the head of the government there, called the chief minister, should have primary responsibility to maintain public order, which means control of the police, but the union in the constitution should be empowered to have a central police and army to be stationed in every state, and also the power to appoint national magistrates or nationally or the owing under the authority of the central government, having magistrates who can override the orders of the state magistrates. Sri Lanka, of course, would be a secular country, but its identity is clearly a Buddhist country, which I think no one can have any objections to. It is, after all, culturally a Buddhist country. But it should be, in political matters, a secular country. And finally, with the increasing proximity of Tamils and Sinhala communities, the recognition that we are the same, that is, they are the same, there's no difference religiously, ethnically, racially, linguistically, any difference, or even from the origins of coming to Sri Lanka, is there any difference between the Tamils and the Sinhalese? One people, I think there should be progressively this sharp polarization, geographical polarization of Tamil and Sinhala must slowly come to an end, and they all must be composite states in the sense that every state has a representation of Tamils and Sinhala. Not some areas exclusively Tamil and some areas exclusively Sinhala. These are some suggestions I make humbly, and this is for your consideration, but I as a friend would find it much easier, I as an Indian would find it much easier to meet criticism against Sri Lanka if there is some early devolution, so that we have that out of the way and we can proceed ahead. Thank you very much.